Two men who are seeking a solution to the economic crisis are Sir Julian Rose and Justin Walker. They formed the Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology in February 2020, and the timing couldn't have been better given the impositions that were imposed on the British people just 1 month later. Julian and Justin, welcome to Right Now. First of all, I honestly don't know much about the Bradbury pound. I confess I'd heard of it, but I don't really know many details. Now, this is something you're promoting. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what that is?
Gosh, right. I shall try and be as brief as I can. My late uncle was Lord Pilkington, and he was a director of the Bank of England from 1955 until 1972. And back in 10 years ago, almost to the month, it was September 2012, I received a mysterious phone call from somebody claiming to have been a director of the Bank of England with my uncle, but he was actually so elderly, he got his son to do the talking. And he basically, his son said, "My father is not long for this world, but he wants you to know about the Bradbury. And if you do, you will find a solution to all of Britain's economic woes." Now, obviously, I was a bit taken aback. I'm not an economist. I know very little about economics, thank goodness. I just work on common sense. Anyway, I looked up the Bradbury, and I eventually came across a book written by Julian Justin MP, who was a Privy Councillor, and he was actually the father of the Scottish hydroelectric scheme in the Highlands, and he looked after Scotland in Churchill's wartime government. And he is a very rare politician because he's actually got a legacy to be proud of, and nobody really found fault with him on both sides of the House. And he wrote a book called The Financiers and the Nation. And in that book, one chapter was dedicated to the corruption in the First World War and the financial story that has largely been airbrushed out of history. And it was all about treasury notes. In those days, it was the gold standard. And the treasury was creating the change in your pocket, but the banknotes promised to pay the bearer the sum of were being created by the Bank of England. And the Bank of England was a very private affair in those days. Today it's nominally owned by the government, but in fact it's controlled by the Bank for International Settlements, and we may come on to that later. So getting on to the Bradbury, or treasury notes, the gold standard, the Bank of England have been creating many times more notes than they actually had gold in the Bank of England vaults to back it up. So when the outbreak of the First World War and the uncertainty of going to war, a global war, people wanted to get their gold out rather than keep on to these notes because they could see devaluation happening, chaos happening. So they wanted to get their hands on something solid, gold. And so the government realised there was going to be a collapse of the banking system and the City of London. They had queues forming outside all the banks around the country wanting to get their money out. So the Treasury, in 2 days, passed a bill through Parliament authorising the Treasury, not the Bank of England, the Treasury, to create treasury notes that were in £1 denomination and 10 shillings or 50 pence. Now, £1 in 1914 is the equivalent of £122 today. So, that's inflation for you. But anyway, everybody accepted these notes. They were originally printed on one side of one side of stamp paper they used for the first batch, and they were called Bradburys because Sir John Bradbury, later Lord Bradbury, was the first secretary to the Treasury, and it was his name that went on the notes. But they didn't have "I promise to pay the bearer the sum of." These were based on the if you like, the assets and the labour potential, the creativity of the nation. In other words, what our nation was worth. So they were debt-free, interest-free, and they were not just hyped up out of thin air. They were based on the wealth of the nation, the credit of the nation. And Julian Justin wrote about this and said what a great success they were. And since then, the Treasury notes saved the day. But then the bankers went running back to David Lloyd George, who was the Chancellor, and said, we can't have this because we've got to be able to make money out of this war. So will you kindly phase out the Bradbury pound and go back to selling bonds? We'll buy them at 3.5% interest, going up to 4% interest. And of course, they were just creating money out of thin air, as they do today. And so the national debt went up from 650 million in 1914, multiplied by 122 to get today's figure. And it went up from 650 million up to 7,500 million in 1919 at the Treaty of Versailles. The point is that money, real money, was created by the government on behalf of the British people that was debt-free, interest-free, because it was based on the wealth, the credit and the labour potential, the creativity of the nation.
So this is something that you could quite simply do again. So Julian, well, both of you, you've written this open letter to Liz Truss, to the UK government. Do you harbour much hope that they're going to either respond or respond favourably to your suggestion?
Well, no, of course not. They don't ever respond, I don't think, to any letters I've ever sent. However, there is a universal issue here. In the universe, the Earth is known as the record keeper. It's called the Akashic Records. So I think what we're doing is we're really putting a marker down, stating the law, the common law of the country, the real constitutional position of England. And we're challenging government to comply to that rather than being outside the law as they currently are. And this is, in a way, a form of documentation of their completely abandoning the British Isles as a sovereign nation state. And when we're putting forward the suggestion of how it could be saved via historically proven event, which Justin has just described, we now have a record in the files that they received this information, they could act on it, and they didn't.
Of course. Well, what happens in your view if they don't act on it, which obviously, you know, as you say, they're not going to, but if they just allow it to go as it is and carry on steamrolling the way it is, you know, how do you see, say, you know, us having this conversation in, say, 5 years' time, how do you see the country looking?
Well, my take is very simple. The entire financial system of the world, the banking and financial system of the world, is run by private, unelected, unaccountable, and highly secretive people who make the decisions about how much or how little money the world has to spend. And that is why we have a third world. That is why we have so many people in the world who go to bed hungry, who are desperate, who are in debt. And what I'm hoping that we will do is to start a national debate. Because if we don't, then what is clearly being engineered with the current financial collapse that they are preparing, because they need total chaos, they need total economic chaos if they're going to have a chance of bringing in the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum's future that they would like to see, and indeed the Bank for International Settlements. And as I say, we'll probably talk about them later on. But if we're going to save innocent people's homes, livelihoods, life savings and pensions, then we have got to get this national debate going.
Do you feel
I'd like to add
sorry,
to that.
Julian. No, yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
No, you go on, Julian. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Basically, I think we ought to also turn our minds to the Great Reset and Klaus Schwab and this man called Yuval Noah Harari, who's Klaus Schwab's main assistant, I understand, who are both claiming that this is only the starting point for something which is going to take all assets from all people. The famous quote now, I think, which everybody probably has seen is, you will have nothing, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. So that's the objective of the World Economic Forum. And added to that is now Yuval Noah Harari, the professor of history at the University of Jerusalem, who says, we're going to invent non-biological humans. We will do better than God. So you can't have megalomania on a bigger scale than that.
You really can't. It is interesting because, you know, the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, that stuff, it was all a conspiracy theory 2 years ago. even though it was right out in the open. People didn't want to admit it. Why do you think that people, particularly within government, because I don't think everyone in government is bad. I don't think everyone in any organisation is bad, in the same way I don't think everyone in any organisation is good. But why do you think those that are not bad within, say, the UK government are not speaking out? You know, they're looking at the fact that you have a solution, both of you, and also the World Economic Forum is saying, you know, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy. That's not a very good sales pitch. So why do you feel that you know, they're not speaking out about this?
Well, as I say, I'm not an economist, but since finding out about the Bradbury, I've clearly tried to get politicians, you know, to try to get to take an interest in this. And I was working it out a week or so ago. I've probably talked to around 25 MPs in the flesh since then. And as soon as I meet an MP, including my current MP, who I've just moved to Wales, the first question I always say after greeting them very pleasantly is, what can you tell me about the Bank for International Settlements? And the answer has always been nothing at all. And then I simply say, do you know anything about treasury money that was used to save the day in the First World War? And they admitted they hadn't. So I'm going to say that ignorance is the worst enemy that we have, and our politicians are bathed in it, as the rest of the country is. So the politicians are no different. We're all collectively ignorant about money creation and money supply. But of course, where the politicians do score is in the realm of arrogance. They certainly have enough arrogance to keep everyone happy. But finally, there are a handful, well, not a handful, quite a number actually, who I would use the word treasonous, because they know full well they're working against the country's interests, because they are part of this Great Reset club. They are part of the the World Economic Forum's young global leaders or whatever. They are part of the network that is working for something beyond what our government is, and they are working for another power, if you like.
Absolutely.
Wes, whenever you see Liz Truss or any of them saying, I can't do it, and that's actually been quite a lot just recently with all this schmozzle about the economy and cutting back here and cutting back there. And when people say to them, why are you doing it? I have to do it, they say. Now, that can only mean, basically, that word is coming down from a higher source, which government is controlled by, that says, I'm sorry, you can't make that move. You have to remember the parameters within which we give you permission to speak and to act. Because the government is owned by the corporations, and the corporations are owned, if you like, by the cabal that runs, the small cabal that runs the world. And the WEF and similar organizations, there are many of them, basically are under that regime command, and therefore our government is largely sterile. And therefore my view is that we, the people, have to take over, and we have to become the government. And that means localizing everything. In fact, it would actually mean, in terms of banking, regional investment banks would become the issue. And that would be on a scale which people could probably actually understand, a village and town scale. And we would have a role in how those banks are run. And we would see the results of investing in those banks in our local communities. You know, that's the only way that we can get back control over the situation.
So do you think that will happen then? It will go to such a local level where, you know, you have certain people in the village, say you go really local, people in the village, you say, you're a plumber, you're an electrician, I run a small holding, a small farm, okay, here's some potatoes, sort out my central heating. You know, everyone kind of help, well, I'm a hairdresser, that's all right, I'll cut everyone's hair. But actually it will go back to that. It actually sounds quite nice, to be honest.
There's not much choice. There's not much choice, actually, because, you know, if the economy is crashed, which is certainly the direction we're going in now, and if it's really crashed, 100% crashed, people are going to be sitting there ringing up that bank or doing trying to find out how much money they've got, and they'll be told, I'm sorry, you know, you'll see in the small print that you agreed that we could take your money from you under the circumstances that there would be a crash, and so on and so forth. The energy suppliers would probably tell you exactly the same thing. And all of a sudden you'd be standing there with no power, no heating, no money. and possibly no food even. As that would probably happen over a period of time, more likely 2 or 3 years, but it could happen almost instantaneously. Where do you turn? You have to turn back to your local community, and you have to get your hands dirty, probably start growing your own food, or at least contact local farmers and try and do a deal with them to supply you and your colleagues with products which hopefully is good quality.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how that COVID thing, kind of how they tried to tear apart society and split people between who was vaccinated, who wasn't, who would wear a mask, who basically bought the narrative and who didn't. And I remember having conversations with people and they were saying, what could you do? And all I could think at that point in this state of flux was just find your tribe, you know, find people that are like you and build this kind of, and I was thinking at that point basically for mental health, if I'm honest, you know, like just find people that, so you're not alone. And actually now those kind of groups have built, and they're even more necessary now than they were then.
Yes.
Could I just make the point that, you know, the definition of what money is simply a convenient unit of exchange for goods and services that people have complete confidence in. Now, it is quite possible to have a decentralized version of the Bradbury pound, or sovereign money as we call it. And there are actually very good examples in history to look at. One being colonial scrip, which was practiced by some of the colonies before the American War of Independence. And in a state like Pennsylvania, for instance, it worked so well that is the main reason, probably, I think it is the main reason, why the colonists suddenly found themselves at war with Britain. But when I say Britain, I would say with the City of London, because they wanted the colonists to get back onto the gold standard. They wanted to get back to taxation and all the rest of it. So in history, we are taught, you know, no taxation without representation was the key word, and they were dumping tea in Boston Harbor and all that. The real reason is they were trying to stop the colonials from using this thing called colonial scrip. And another example is the small island of Guernsey. After the Napoleonic Wars, the island was suffering, was quite destitute, and the governor of the island suddenly realized, well, we've got the building materials, we've got all the materials we need, we've got the labour to rebuild our customs house, our dock facilities and all the rest of it, but we haven't got the money. Well, I'll create the money based on the wealth of our island, and we'll use that money to exchange for what we need to do. And as a result, they built the wretched thing. They built the infrastructure that Guernsey needed. And then they retired the money having done it. In fact, they were told to by the City of London again, who did not want people straying away from the way they like to control things by controlling the money.
There's so many things through history that you can look back on. It's extraordinary, isn't it? But thank you so much for coming on, both of you. So people at home that want to look up the Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology and read that open letter that you wrote to Liz Truss, where you explain in great detail about the Bradbury pound, how can people find you?
Just go on to the website, just feed in Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology, and you will find it immediately. There's only one organisation like ours. And you will see our logo, which is a hare looking at a signpost, and to the left it says freedom and real ecology, etc., and to the right it says tyranny and fascism and stuff. And as one wit said to us, our logo, he liked it enormously because it was Klaus Schwab meets Beatrix Potter. So it's a lovely logo, but when you go on it, you will be able to see the letter there and everything. So we're a very friendly bunch. We like to do things in a very nice way, because we've got to get all those people who have been basically taken in by the fake green narrative coming from the World Economic Forum, the UN and everyone else about the climate change and all that. We've got to get the Greens back to being real Greens again. And the only way to do that is to be nice and pleasant and attractive to them, so they come and hear the arguments and they see how they've been misled.
Absolutely.
Well, and the Hardwick estate, incidentally, Hardwick is the property which I own, and we've been organic since 1975. We were one of the first pioneers of organic farming, and we still are, and we're becoming a very lively community over there. It's in South Oxfordshire, and it's a real place, and it's doing good things.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you so much, Sir Julian. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.